Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this CIWEM Central Southern branch webinar about the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme. My name is Lewis Purbrick, and I'm Flood Mitigation Officer at Oxfordshire County Council. I'm also a chartered member of CIWEM and member of CIWEM Central Southern branch, and I'm very pleased to be chairing this session this afternoon. This afternoon, we're going to be hearing from Veronica James, the Environment Agency's Planning Manager on the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme. And she's going to be talking about how they are overcoming the challenges of delivering a major multi-billion-pound flood alleviation scheme. If we could just move on to the next slide, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just a quick bit of housekeeping and some plugs for upcoming events. Everyone apart from the speakers should be muted automatically. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat function. Raise your hand and use the chat function within Zoom, and one of our support team will do their best to help you. If you've got questions that you'd like answered, as we go through the presentation, then please use the Q&A function on the Zoom, and we will get through as many of those as we can after the presentation. Please note that you can upvote questions as well. So if you've got questions that you see other people have asked that you'd like to hear answered, then go into the Q&A section, like those, and it will upvote those questions. If we could just go on to the next slide, please. For anyone who's new to CIWEM events, just a little bit about CIWEM. CIWEM is the Chartered Institute of Water and Environment Management. We're a chartered institute and a registered charity. And you can find out more about CIWEM by visiting our website at ciwem.org. On that webpage, you can also find details of upcoming CIWEM events. That's fine, we'll just stay on this slide for the time being. And it seems to be a really busy period at the moment for CIWEM events. So I'm just going to highlight a few which are coming up over the next week or so, and then we'll leave a list up of events at the end of the presentation. So just to highlight a few that are coming up over the next week. Tomorrow, there is a tour of Minworth wastewater treatment works in the West Midlands. That's an in-person event. When I had a look earlier, you could still sign up for that. So if you're interested, please take a look and sign up for that. Then on the 29th, there's another in-person event, this time via our colleagues in Northern Ireland branch. And that is an in-person event, Northern Ireland, our water, our environment, our place, a spotlight on Lough Neagh. And that's their conference for 2025. And that's an in-person event at Lough Neagh. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then one other to flag at the moment is the Be Ready webinar for any of you who have an interest in flood risk management, which hopefully many of you do, given today's topic. And that is in relation to the technicalities of delivering property flood resilience. And that's the webinar on the 1st of October. And as I mentioned, it's a really busy period for CIWEM events at the moment. So there are lots of other events coming up over the next few months listed on the CIWEM event pages of the website, including what looks like a really interesting series of training sessions by JBA Consulting. There is a cost to those, but they're covering some really practical topics in relation to flood risk management and the environment throughout October. So if those are of interest to you, I would encourage you to check those out as well. But now on to today's webinar. If you could go on to the next slide, please. I'm very pleased to introduce Veronica James, the Environment Agency's Planning Manager on the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme, who will be talking to us about how they are overcoming the challenges of delivering a major flood alleviation scheme. Veronica is a chartered town planner with over 30 years experience. Her career is involved working in both the public and private sector, focusing on environmental planning. Veronica joined the Environment Agency after 17 years as an associate and then director of the Planning Cooperative. Veronica currently works alongside a team of project managers and multidisciplinary specialists in Thames area of the Environment Agency. She manages the planning approvals to secure consent for major flood alleviation schemes designed to reduce flood risk, bringing her experience to help guide the projects through the process. And having had the pleasure of working with Veronica, I can vouch that she's a genuine professional with absolutely bags of knowledge. So I'm really looking forward to hearing her presentation. Please do remember to post your questions in the Q&A tool on Zoom for us to discuss after the presentation. And I will now pass over to Veronica. Over to you, Veronica.
Thanks, Lewis, and thanks for that introduction. So I'm really happy to be here today to talk to you about the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme and some of the challenges that we're having. And at the end, Penny Burt will be joining me. She's the Principal Environmental Project Manager for the scheme. She'll be joining me to answer any of your questions. So what I want to cover today is, first of all, to remind ourselves why Oxford needs a flood alleviation scheme and where the project has come from. And then I'll outline to you what we are proposing, the environmental design, and highlight some of these challenges that we've faced along the way, but also some of the opportunities that it brings with it, and bring you up to date with the recent milestones we've achieved. So, why? Well, you'll be aware that a lot of towns and cities in this country have grown up around rivers and river crossings. That's our legacy, and Oxford is no different. You can see from this photo that Oxford has a long history of flooding. We know that it's been subject to seasonal flooding for many centuries, and there have been a number of significant floods in past decades that have caused property damage to homes and businesses, closed the railway, and closed the two major roads going in, the Botley Road and the Abingdon Road. Because Oxford sits at the confluence of 7 rivers, and the floodplain narrows significantly immediately downstream of the city, which then constrains the flow. And also it's exacerbated by historic development in the floodplain as well. So Oxford's experienced recently flooding in the year 2000, 2003, 2007, 2012, and 2013-14. So flooding in Oxford impacts thousands of people. Climate change means that floods are predicted to become more frequent and more severe. So it's only going to be a matter of time before Oxford floods again. It affects people's homes and their livelihoods, their communities. And with flooding comes the trauma of dealing with it, the worry it might happen again, and this impacts on people's well-being. So where did our scheme come from? Well, it's evolved over time. After the 2007 floods, we developed the Oxford Flood Risk Management Strategy, which looked at over 100 different combinations of options to reduce flood risk in Oxford. And the strategy recommended a 3-stage approach to reducing flood risk for the city. The first was to provide temporary measures and to support communities with their own flood resilience. And then the second part of the strategy is the Oxford scheme that we're talking about today. This will create more space for water within the existing floodplain. And then the third, final stage of the strategy is the recommendation to investigate upstream floodwater storage options to help mitigate increased flood risk from climate change. So in 2014, following the winter floods, a group of local partners came together to start work on the Oxford Flood Alleviation Scheme. And we're now working with 9 partners on this project and will continue to do so through to delivery. You can see our partners from the logos at the bottom of this slide. And we wouldn't have got this far, we wouldn't have been able to progress the scheme so far without their support, without their encouragement, but also their questioning and their challenging of what we're doing. So partnership, engagement and collaboration have been key to our scheme throughout. And we've engaged with local communities throughout the design process with consultation and drop-in events. We've attended parish council and community group meetings, pop-up events and regular newsletters. Where we were able to, we adapted our scheme to accommodate the concerns and challenges that were raised to us. And we hope that communities will actually be proud of the scheme in years to come. And we're going to continue to work with communities leading up to the construction phase and into construction. So what are we proposing? Well, it's a nature-based solution, a passive solution, so no on-off switches, and we're creating a new stream with a wetland wildlife corridor to the west of Oxford. The scheme runs from the area to the north of Botley Road, all the way down to the west of Oxford to reconnect with the River Thames at Kennington, and it's 5 kilometres long. We're going to be drawing water away from the built-up areas into the natural floodplain by creating a new stream and by lowering parts of the floodplain alongside that stream to make more space for water away from those built-up areas and also bringing environmental benefits to the area. So the same amount of water that enters the scheme to the north of the Botley Road will re-enter the Thames where it rejoins in Kennington. And this is really important as it ensures that flood risk is not increased downstream because we can't transfer the risk to another community. This slide shows the before and after, so you can see the differences in the two sides. And it shows in the after the areas where there will be most benefit. The floodplain will still flood, but some areas will be at reduced risk. And the main areas are the Botley Road area, the Abingdon Road area, and then Oseney Mead and South Hinksey. So there'll be a reduction in flood risk to properties, but also it will reduce the risk to the infrastructure so that everyone who lives or works or visits the city will benefit from the reduced flood risk to the railway and to the Botley Road and Abingdon Road. Also, there'll be fewer flood-related electricity, telephone and internet disruptions, keeping Oxford open for business and supporting the tourism economy. So I talked about a new stream, which will link up with the existing stream. So how's it going to work? This diagram explains it. At the top, it shows that there will always be water in the stream. Then, in times of flood, when water levels rise in the River Thames, second part of the diagram, the new stream will overtop and water will start to fill the lowered floodplain around it, reducing the flood risk to the surrounding built-up areas. And then the third part in the diagram, in major floods, water will still use the wider existing floodplain, which is mostly farmland and flood meadow. In this way, the scheme is designed to work together with the natural floodplain. It's designed to be a natural scheme and needs very little intervention. So we're keeping hard engineering to a minimum, but some structures will be built where needed, such as earth embankments and flood walls in some places to reduce risk to houses, which would otherwise still flood, and some new bridges for the footpaths and bridleways so they can cross the stream. And then I just want to mention the environment and the environmental design. So I don't expect you to be able to read all the key on the plan, but hopefully this will give you a bit of a flavour of what we're doing, because the scheme has been designed with the environment in mind all the way through. And we understand how important this area is to local people, and the benefits will go beyond flood risk. So we're creating 20 hectares of new wetland habitat, a habitat which is scarce. And as part of the scheme, alongside the new stream, it will form a part of a network of wetland west of Oxford. The wildlife corridor will help to increase biodiversity and to encourage diverse wetland and aquatic wildlife. Also, our tree planting proposals will result in more woodland within the scheme area after completion than there is currently at present. We have an ambitious environmental vision for the long-term management of the scheme area. This ensures that the scheme is maintained for its lifetime, with a focus on enhanced habitat, environmental and recreational benefits in the long term. So early on, we formed a collaboration with environmental charity Earth Trust, whilst designing the scheme to future-proof it for the long-term environmental benefits and to establish the best approach to ensure the scheme improves the local environment over time. And then once we're nearer to construction of the scheme, we will appoint an external environmental partner. And this partner will help to ensure that the Oxford scheme delivers a long-term green legacy for years to come. But away from flood risk, there are other challenges, just as there are with any large infrastructure schemes. And I want to touch on a few that we have dealt with. At Hinksey Meadow, now this is in the northern part of the scheme, we have a rare grassland on the site known as MG4. That's a mesotrophic grassland category. And during 2015 and 2016, when we were consulting stakeholders and the public about our options, we were made aware of the quality of this floodplain meadow in the area. And this helped to inform our design in this area. So keeping the lowered area narrower and committing to no temporary working areas or maintenance track through Hinksey Meadow. Also, once we were aware of the unavoidable impact on the MG4, we also commissioned the Floodplain Meadows Partnership of the Open University to undertake a study looking at the likely direct and indirect impacts and how we could minimise these further and how we could mitigate for them. And from their report, we developed our MG4 mitigation strategy, which we submitted with our planning application. And this includes taking the 2 hectares of grassland that we're going to dig up and translocating it, so relocating it as turf to a location with similar conditions where it will be properly managed as hay meadow. But we're also creating around 16 hectares of new species-rich floodplain meadow seeded from this rare grassland. We've also included features to maintain the groundwater levels in Hinksey Meadow, which you can see by the stars on this slide, which are groundwater monitoring stations. And the squares denote the proposed riffles to maintain groundwater levels. And then there are some planning tensions that I wanted to highlight. So one of the main roads in Oxford is along the route of an ancient causeway, and there are a group of scheduled culverts beneath it. So originally, our design sought to go through the culverts as there is an existing stream there, and it would provide the best route hydraulically for the scheme. However, following initial investigations, there was so much unknown about the scheduled culverts that Historic England were very concerned. And they were also concerned about any disturbance of the causeway. So after a 3-way discussion, Historic England, Highways Authority and ourselves, we agreed a compromise to dogleg the new stream to avoid the culverts, to move it to the west and go through the causeway, which was not scheduled. I'm summarising this very simply, but it was a long and drawn out discussion between the parties, the archaeologists, the specialists and the engineers, but we agreed a compromise, which was good. And then There are always traffic implications when moving material around, but we had an extra challenge with the Oxford scheme as we proposed the closure of 2 roads whilst channeling the new stream beneath them. This was at the southern end of the scheme near the scheduled culverts. And National Highways were concerned about the knock-on impacts to the nearby strategic road network, a road that is already at capacity. And traffic modelling showed an increase in standing traffic on the slip roads at the nearest junction at peak hours. From a safety perspective, this was unacceptable to them. So again, 3-way discussions to find an acceptable solution. And this is the acceptable solution, a temporary carriageway that can be used in sequence with the closure of one road and then the other road, keeping 2-way traffic flowing. And this solution has to be in place and operational before our contractors start work in the area. It involves an increase in land take, an increase in complexity, and an increase in cost, but it is a solution all parties have been able to agree to. And then, as with any project of this type and complexity, it takes time and things change along the way. And sometimes there are unexpected incidents which sideswipe you. For us, this was the A423 bridge replacement. So during a routine inspection in 2019, the County Council found that the A423 Kennington Bridge, which is on the Southern bypass and goes over the railway, it needed to be replaced, but flood water from our scheme needed to pass underneath it. This is a photograph of the bridge with some props that's keeping it safe. So we had to withdraw our planning application, we had to withdraw our compulsory purchase order and work with the County Council. The replacement of the bridge alongside the scheme required an alteration to our design, but it did provide an opportunity to design and build the bridge and the scheme together, reducing disruption and ensuring the best use of public money. So our proposals were resubmitted with a design taking account of the bridge replacement, and their replacement project is also able to take account of our scheme. There have also been policy and guidance changes, which is another result of long time scales. So a couple of examples here. In July 2021, the new climate change allowances were published with the change from river basin districts to management catchments. So theoretically, under transitional arrangements, we could have stuck with the modelling we had already carried out, but we thought it may cause us problems in the future. So we reran our hydraulic modelling, and as the site was close to the boundary of 3 different catchments, we had to get agreement for which catchment to use, and we took a precautionary approach. And then I couldn't be talking about this scheme today without talking about biodiversity net gain. And we, through the design of our scheme, we had been keeping an eye on what was happening and tried to future-proof our planning application for BNG, biodiversity net gain. We had committed to it, but we submitted before the regulations kicked in. The metric changed quite last minute before we submitted our planning application, whilst we were in the final stages of preparation, and also some of the habitats improved in condition. So we've ended up with a combination of on and off-site BNG, but it is pre-regulation and it is using the metric that was in place on submission, so not today's metric. We realise now it probably would have been easier if the regulations were in place with the guidance that supports them, as the ecologists, the specialists, our lawyers and our planners and the county council planners are all finding their way through the implications of providing BNG pre-regulation. So I've outlined some of the issues that we've been facing and the solutions we found, but I also want to highlight some of the positives, the opportunities that can come either directly or indirectly from flood alleviation schemes. alongside the flood risk reduction for an area. So, habitat and research opportunities. I've mentioned the creation of habitats a few times, and this scheme gives us the opportunity to manage what is existing there, but also to create, manage and monitor new habitats. And we've been working up research opportunities with the University of Oxford so that we can share learning over the coming years as we monitor the habitats we're creating. And we've been meeting with various faculties, and they've been very positive about working with us. And then to improving access, because we know that people like to use the scheme area, whether it's for walking the dog, walking to school, or taking a walk at lunchtime from the local offices. So we're improving existing access whilst retaining the scheme's function and integrity. We're going to be retaining and improving footpaths and cycleways and creating a new permissive path 1.5 kilometres long along the maintenance track for the scheme. And then for education, we've linked in with schools in the areas, increasing awareness and understanding of flooding and flood risk through children and education. We're working with the Department of Education, the City Council and 2 primary schools, and that's going to continue as the scheme progresses. And then I mentioned that we will have an environmental partner on board for the land that we will own and for them to manage on a long-term lease and manage in line with our planning permission. And this is to secure long-term benefits for the area, but also to seek out the opportunities for education, for working with the local communities, creating a place not only with reduced flood risk, but a place that we and the local communities can be proud of in the future. So what progress have we been made? Well, in May of this year, the compulsory purchase order was confirmed. The CPO is a legal process that allows land, property and rights of access to be acquired from landowners. And we had to make a CPO as we have to be able to deliver the whole scheme and therefore need all of the land to construct and deliver it. A public inquiry into the CPO was held November 2023 to January 24, and we as a project had to demonstrate that there is a compelling case in the public interest for it. And we've been in negotiations with landowners and tenants to secure agreements for the land that we need. And we have been successful in reaching agreements with several of them, but for the rest of the land, we will be able to use the CPO, which, as I mentioned, was confirmed in May of this year. And then if I turn to the planning application, this was submitted to Oxfordshire County Council and went through all the formal processes leading up to a committee meeting in July of last year, where the committee made a resolution to grant permission subject to 2 things. One was a referral to the Secretary of State, which took place immediately. And she said she didn't need to determine it, so it's back to the County Council. And the second is the signing of a legal agreement with regard to the delivery of the off-site BNG we are going to provide. So we're in that process at the moment. We're in the final stages of agreeing a Section 106 agreement. It's been challenging because, as I said earlier, BNG is new and our application falls outside of the regulations, but we are almost there. And I thought you might be interested to see where our off-site BNG is going to be. It's in 3 locations. Part of it is absolutely adjacent to our scheme. We've managed to secure some land adjacent, which is really good. And then some will be provided at the Blenheim estate, and that will be wet woodland, ditches and hedgerows. And then some will be provided in Long Wittenham by Earth Trust, and that's going to be hedgerows. And we've worked with these delivery partners before on other projects, so we're confident that we will secure really well-managed habitats through them. And then what's next? So as soon as our Section 106 agreement is signed, we can have our planning permission, so that will be granted. Then we have some final approvals to go through internally, and that involves government as well. Because of the CPO being confirmed, we have the ability to acquire possession of the land when needed, if needed, and then we will have to discharge the pre-commencement conditions which will be imposed on the planning permission. So with all of that, we are hoping to be able to start construction of the scheme late 2026. So that's where I'm going to finish. Thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, which I hope are going into the Q&A, Penny and I will hope to be able to answer them. If there are any that we cannot answer, we can always take those away and reply in writing to you. Thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing now.